So let's move on to what, in many ways, I think may be the highlight of this podcast. It may also be the lowlight of this podcast.
Yeah, it's hard to make your mind up, really, isn't it?
Yes, because I'm not convinced anybody involved that made their mind up on anything in particular. This is, well, it's a thing.
Yes.
So, having been quite worried last night that I had to try and explain what this thing was, I am pleased to find that no, we had in fact changed after our initial discussion that I was doing this, that you were doing it, and I had simply forgotten, so I was worried for nothing. But Scott, explain Mandy to, well, me to begin with, and the listeners afterwards.
Yeah, so there's quite the buzz about Mandy amongst the weird film Twitter, which we've been known to hang out occasionally, so much so that it kind of leaked into the mainstream. As much as something like this can, I suppose. So, what's the deal with Panos Cosmatos' second outing a mere 8 years after his debut? Well, I'm not completely sure, to be honest, but let's try and work through this together, shall we? Let's workshop it. Nick Cage's Red Miller is a lumberjack, and he's okay, for a short while anyway. Living in a remote cabin with his artsy girlfriend, Andrea Riseborough's Mandy, the unconventional pair seem very much in love and happy. For a short while anyway. Q cult leader Jeremiah Sand, played by Linus Roach's appearance, taking a passing fancy to Mandy and issuing orders to his assorted hangers-on, freaks and geeks to procure her for some crazy mystical nonsense reasons that he may or may not believe, but his followers certainly do. The gang, including 3 Hellraiser-esque bikers who are, for a short while anyway, introduced as actual blood-drinking demons, bring Mandy back to their lair, but even after a drug-addled indoctrination, she's not compliant with their wishes. The obvious next step? Incinerate her in front of a helpless Red and leave him for dead. However, he doesn't die, and with the added indignity of them ripping his favourite shirt, is enough to set him off on a roaring rampage of revenge. Stopping off at Bill Duke's home to pick up some murder supplies, he's told of the rumours of how dangerous this lot are, in case he needed more warning than he'd already witnessed. And hints are thrown around about Red's past that imply some of the particular set of skills that will make him a nightmare for people that burn his loved ones to death in front of him. And so begins the cavalcade of vengeance, and framed like that, Mandy sounds like a fairly standard revenge film. It is not. Where to start? Visually, maybe the easiest. It's quite the most aggressively graded film I've ever seen, making Suspiria feel like a muted exercise in restraint. It's a disorientating deluge of colour overlays that's by turns disgusting and pretty and distracting and engaging. It's really quite strange. But perhaps most notably, it's a Nick Cage turn that sets, or at least comes very close to setting, a new high watermark for full Nick Cage. His transformation from content hippie to frothing madman makes for a remarkable set of scenes, culminating in the bathroom meltdown you may have seen on your Twitter account, with the remaining hour or so being no less memorable, particularly when combined with the extreme visuals on display. It makes what would otherwise be a series of slightly odd vignettes of violence become something truly memorable and remarkable, albeit in ways that I still cannot yet work out if should be sorted into a bucket marked genius or a bucket marked abysmal. Now, I'll say this, it's clearly far from perfect. Cult leader Linus Roach in particular being a non-entity that did not make for compelling viewing in the slightest, and the half-hour-ish stretch where he's given rein in the scenes with the cult members and introduction of Mandy and so on came quite close to exhausting my patience. At about 2 hours, this film is half an hour too long, and it's this half hour in particular, when there's no motivation, creed or logic behind the cult and their actions other than Kanye West levels of crazy. Coming after...
Oh, steady on. I thought you couldn't find any way to top Nick Cage, but maybe. At least I can see a through line to this that makes some sort of sense, not Kanye West.
Coming after a slow start, which establishes Mandy and Red's peaceful life, I was getting a tad annoyed with the deliberate quirkiness of this and about to mentally check out before it radically switches gear and turns into a more whacked-out crank film. Now, the last hour is a mesmerisingly insane riot of sequences that, whether you're on board or not, absolutely demand attention, with action and visuals that left me in gales of laughter. I'm assuming we're not to take this seriously? Purely? Actually, I'm not sure of anything this film or Nick Cage in general does. When he's interviewed, he doesn't seem like a maniac and gives broadly sensible reasons for playing characters the way he does, yet this is clearly the work of a madman. That's not entirely fair This is an entire team of mad people dedicated to artisanally crafting a mad film. Your boring conventional judgments of good or bad are not an axis that this film chooses to grade itself on. It's going for memorable, and it's most certainly that. Bonkers. Couldn't make it up, particularly the Cheddar Goblin. Yes, very, very strange, but I think I loved it. I'm not sure.
I don't know what. I don't know if I like this film or not, but I certainly don't regret watching it.
Yes.
I assume that Cheddar Goblin is a real vintage advert, but what is a Cheddar Goblin?
You think a Cheddar Goblin's a macaroni and cheese advert where a goblin vomits mac and cheese onto kids? You think that's a real thing?
Yes. The 80s were a weird time, Scott. Don't you know, didn't you ever wonder what the impetus for Ronald Reagan's Just Say No campaign was? It was the Cheddar Goblin. Also, I'm going very much down a rabbit hole here, but the Cheddar Goblin talking about having 60% more cheese than other things than other cheese. But isn't like cheese just 100% cheese when it's actual cheese? Yes. Now, there are many horrible things in this world, but of the things that are good and fine about this world that make me happy, one of them is Nick Cage. I am so glad that Nick Cage exists and he is doing these things for us. And in my head, the Cheddar Goblin was a real thing in a real universe. And I'm happier that way, quite frankly. But yes, what to make of this film? I don't know. It is aggressively graded, you're right. It's rather oppressively so at times.
Yes.
It is, I don't know, whoever thought that Nick Cage had another level of crazy in him and was given a vehicle in which to be this crazy? It's mind-boggling, it's bewildering, it's terrible and great, often at the same time. And there's imagery in here that I'm not 100% sure is actually imagery or it's meant to be something that's happening in the film. Like, for instance, there's a tiger at some point, but we're very conspicuously seeing Nick Cage go crazy while wearing a t-shirt with a large tiger in the front. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm assuming this tiger doesn't exist because it's just a representation of Nick Cage when he visits the LSD dealer or creator. But then I'm thinking, given the rest of this film, no, it may actually just be a tiger.
Yes.
And he has a tiger there because...
I think this is probably more documentarian in its approach. I think if I tried to attempt to map metaphor onto this thing, we'd be here all day. So I'm just going to choose to believe that this is all entirely real.
All in universe.
Yes.
I mean, I have questions about the film. I had questions from the beginning. For what reason was the film set in 1983? And I couldn't, beyond some desire to use very stranger things like idents for a couple of places that didn't need idents at all, let alone conspicuously 1980s styled ones. Why is it set in this time period? There's very little beyond the 4:3 CRT television and the Cheddar Goblin that's got much of an 80s attachment at all. There's not any particular plot point that would rely on not having a mobile phone and having to explain that away. So I don't understand that.
I think the mistake you're making is to try and attempt to map reason onto this film.
Yes, I'm trying to understand it all.
Yes.
It's so strange. And again, because that part of my mind is always going on. But, okay, Nick Cage is going out for revenge. Okay, this makes sense. And he's getting tooled up. He goes and gets his killing supplies from Bill Duke. Great. Okay. That massive, ludicrous axe he makes, did he have a mould for that ready-made, or did he in fact take time out of his vengeance to make a mould just to make that axe? Either are possible. And why? And then at one point he takes enough cocaine to kill a small horse.
Yeah.
It doesn't die. That should stop his heart immediately, possibly make his heart explode. It's bewildering. Now, as we've discussed several times, I don't particularly care for horror films in general. But I actually this time found myself wishing that it first presented as supernatural bikers had been. I actually thought that would have been more interesting.
Yeah.
Because there are some other hints that there is something supernatural going on, because there's that, and it's one of the creepiest bits in the film, actually, the preserved giant hornet. But that it seems to be alive, even though it's preserved. And like, okay, that's creeping me out. So I also don't like insects. It's one of the few things that will make me squirm. But it's just it's so trippy and so odd. And I love and hate this film, and I love it. I don't know, it's so hard to describe. I don't think you could recommend it, but also I would like to recommend it. It is very much a film of opposites in many, many ways, with the possible exception of Johan Johansson's score. It's the one thing that I know for certain that I didn't like.
Right.
I've liked his music a lot. His collaborations with Denis Villeneuve in particular are really good. The sort of otherworldly soundtrack to Arrival, or the incredibly tense music in Sicario. But here, I don't know whether the issue was with his music or where and how it was used. And because he sadly took his own life in February. I mean, that was after this was released at Sundance, so maybe he did have input into how it was used. But there's one particular example I'm thinking of is near the beginning, and there's this huge burst of portentous music, and it's meant to be like really unsettling. And I'm watching the screen and thinking, yeah, but dude, she's reading a book.
Yeah.
It's all that's happening. Mandy's reading a book, and there is nothing significant about that at all, really. So that's the only like definite downside I have, is that score. Everything else is good bad, and bad good, and mostly mental. I certainly don't think I've seen anything like Mandy before. If I have, it's quite some time ago.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Mandy is definitely a thing, and I recommend that you don't watch it while watching it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's what I guess I could say is that regardless of whether you wind up hating it or loving it, if you're the kind of person that actually bothers to listen to a film review podcast, then you're kind of the person who's going to want to be challenged by something, I would imagine. This is certainly challenging on a number of levels, and so unless you have a particular distaste for, I suppose, is it fair to call this graphically violent? I suppose it is. It really felt like it is, but unless you have some sort of reason to shy away from that, or for some reason you're a monster and don't like watching Nick Cage going mental, then yeah, that's probably the reasons you would have not to watch it. I think it's certainly worth looking at, regardless of whether you like it or hate it.
I would say it's considerably less graphic than Upgrade.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Come to think about it. Yeah.
Which you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also,
Mandy.
It helps that a lot of the violence is, I guess, more Evil Dead-y 2 kind of violence levels, rather than anything that's particularly coming across as realistic. Mm-hmm. So that helps it feel a bit lighter, I suppose.
Yes. And Nick Cage going crazy in the bathroom, downing a bottle of vodka to get rid of the burning in his throat from the garroting.
So it works, right?
That's a fantastic scene.
Yes. A lot to recommend or not recommend, depending on your view. But yeah, I think it's worth watching.
And possibly both at the same time. This is the magic of Mandy.
Yeah, it is the most interesting film I've seen this year. So yes, it's probably well worth looking at for that basis.
Indeed.